hear me okay?
Yes.
This program was first given, a little over a year ago. And we'll see about moving forward with it. I turn over the line with vintage photographs. First, what was the Carson in Colorado? Okay. Connected at Mound House. Down through Wabuska to Hawthorne. Hawthorne was the division point operations base for the railroad. Hawthorne came about because of the railroad and then nearly died when the railroad pulled out. Came down through Mina, where it was north of which was later converted to standard gauge. On up to Candelaria first, and then continued on to get near Benton, the mines at Benton, on down into the Owens Valley to Keeler and the Cerro Gordo mines. Built by men associated with the V&T. Several of the names we've already heard today. Mills, of course. Sharon was the number 2 investor. Other investors in the railroad were Ball. You had Looning, whose son-in-law was Whittel. And Whittel ended up owning quite a bit of land up around Lake Tahoe. Also, Whittel was involved with a buying of the E&P, a sheriff's sale, 1910, 1911 era. It's quite a number of people, and they built the line. They were built to serve the southern mines and act as a feeder to the V&T. They were looking for their next bonanza. The big bonanza in Virginia City that had occurred, and okay, now that is coming down, then they finally are looking at expanding the railroad, and they expanded it as a 3-foot gauge feeder line. And 300 miles was a significant construction during the years of 1880, 1883 here in the West. And built like many other Western expansion lines, dirt ballast. They did, they bought Baldwin engines, they bought some new technology and some very traditional technology. Locomotives. Here's number 3, the Bodie, built in 1881. The Hawthorne, 82. Darwin, 1883. Right at that 82, 83 time, the Baldwin went from the fluted domes to the plain dome. And so the engines reflected that. 7 and 8 came in this configuration. Passenger cars. Barney and Smith cars of 1881. Caboose 1 was built in the V&T shops here in Carson City in 1882. The trucks for it came from the Barney and Smith company. The Caboose office car was built along with it, and apparently built also with a flat roof, was soon modified with the clerestory and converted into a officer's car for the railroad. And this car is currently still in existence. It's being restored down in Southern California. Combine 7.
You lost your mic.
Lost your mic.
Lost.
No, there
Mic
it is.
is on.
Or you just need to speak into it.
1. Do you hear that?
No, no.
Change the battery.
How about this?
Yeah.
Okay, we'll do it this way. Okay, Combine 7, also built in the V&T shops, the same 36-foot length as the 2 cabooses. The request was to build a car similar to the cabooses, the Detroit combines on the V&T, so the shops even replicated the roofline configuration of the Detroit cars. And then in '96, office car 10 was built. That was Meralda. That name was not applied until the SP shops the car in 1902. And 1902, 1903. And that was, okay. The Lamoth pipe frame boxcars were a kind of a modern attempt to create, it was, maybe I'm hearing it come, yeah, I'm getting a slight delay to myself. You know, the Lamoth pipe frame was an early attempt at a metal freight car, and they bought a number of these box cars and flat cars, and within a year's time, the Dayton newspaper was saying, these are not holding up as well as the traditional wooden cars. But these cars did last around into the Tonopah boom era, and then a few bodies have survived, and one partially burned out one, and one that's more intact are part of the museum here in Carson City in their collection. And the line ran from Mound House, 1882. Some indication this photo may be a later day photo, considering who is shown up on a, I think, hardback print, the photographer's name, but can see the Lamoth car running an express service, combine car with a smoking section from Barney and Smith, and then a coach. And you get a combination of wooden and Lamoth flat cars and more wood, and quite a variety there. During the construction time, they were running 14, 16, 18 car, even up to, I think, 24 car long construction trains out of Mound House carrying the rails and ties down when they were building the railroad. This is also Mound House. This is in 1903. Esmeralda had just been rebuilt in the SP Sacramento shops. They got rid of the cupola and created a standard, more observation room at that end of the car and putting more partitions inside. This was July 16th, 1903. The train register listing still exists in special collections. And we have that the engineer was Cagwin, who was probably seniority number 1 in the engineer's roster at the time. He went to work with the railroad back in 1881, driving a water wagon for the construction crews, and retired from the Southern Pacific in, I think it was 23 or 24, and dies in 1944. This is a inspection trip by SP officials coming over the line, and it was being led, even though he was no longer involved directly with the railroad, by Laws, who was superintendent of the Sacramento division at that time, and I kind of have a think that this might be Laws at that time. The conductor was Gale, and I think Gale had first worked as a conductor on the V&T and goes to the CNC, and quite often the newspapers refer to him as Deacon Gale. You know, I don't know if he was a deacon in one of the churches or just some other, nomenclature of respect for him. This gentleman appears, he matches a photograph of Philip McGrath, who was trainmaster at this time on the railroad. And these two are probably the clerks, waiting for everything to get moving. And if you zoom in on this, it's the engine crew is waiting, the engineer leaning against the switch stand and the fireman against the tender. Everybody kind of waiting for the photographer to get done and pile on the train and head south. Long morning shadows. They left at 6 in the morning and got all the way to Keeler by the end of the day and came back the next day. And while Keeler Laws had a chance to check on the milling works, the development soda processing plant down there, and actually composed a letter on the train coming back to Urington about what he saw as being problems with the situation down there. And the letter exists with Urington papers at Bancroft Library. Past Wabuska in the Mason Valley. This is the first station at Wabuska, and it's apparently a relocation of the V&T station, into Hawthorne. There was no town of Hawthorne before the railroad came. And this is an aerial view, not quite an aerial, taken from apparently up on top of a windmill, looking over the town and into the yard. And we have an engine here. We have a number of passenger cars here, and pretty full yard. Freight house still exists, and then here's the station building. And they had 2 engine houses. Second one gets built after they were keeping more than 2 engines overnight. The engine houses were 2 engines deep. They were keeping more than 2 engines, and as much to protect the engine as the engine watchman was the reason for building the second engine house. Leaving Hawthorne, typical mixed train with passenger cars at the far end. Here's Looning. I mentioned one of the investors being Looning. German immigrant who made money in San Francisco during the gold rush and became an investor. And this is about 1906, 1907, probably right after standard gauging. But it clearly shows what the facility was like. Train order board would have come in with the SP, so this is after SP. Photo from the California State Railroad Museum, and they had unknown location and were finally able to identify it by matching the mountains in the background. Sodaville. This is sacked ore coming out of Tonopah before the railroad was built into Tonopah, and Central Nevada Museum, and they credit a Jim Butler photo album for this photo. To Belleville, this is a picture showing the upper mill, and you have some of the ore cars with one of the CNC 8-wheelers, getting ready to dump the ore into the processing facilities. Before the railroad came, they were bringing the ore in by wagon up here at the upper mill. And this is looking over Belleville. And this is the upper mill, and where the railroad came in, they brought in cordwood, and they also brought in ore. The ore came from Candelaria, the cordwood would have come from elsewhere on the line. This right up here, this is a scale for the wagons coming in with the ore. And the pit for that scale exists up there. This is the lower mill. There were 2 mills, and there were 2 side tracks, one for each mill. And then we can zoom on in here a bit. And we have the depot and 2 V&T style square water tanks. And the very typical original stations, which in time get expanded in different ways. This one got a second story on it for living accommodations. Candelaria, and we have a number of, pictured who we have identified as engineers and conductors and all that, and some of these names showed up, in the train register. And you've hauled ore out of Candelaria to Belleville, and you would have to haul water around on this railroad. And heading out of Junction, out of the Belleville, Candelaria area, you went up and over Montgomery Pass. This is Summit, which then becomes named Sunland. And what we know is the later day was way over here on the other side of the Summit Saddle is where the telegraph office was in later days. The highway now cuts right through this area, coming through about like this. And up here in the background, you got Montgomery Peak and Boundary Peak. And the state line running right between the 2 peaks up and over the mountain. Quite often, you need to have peaks separated by a certain distance for the map and geologists and all this to consider it separate mountain peaks. But in this case, they made an exception so that one peak, could become Boundary Peak and be the highest location in Nevada. Here's a view at Summit. The engine 1, the Candelaria, got a small snowplow. The high reflection on the boiler jacket is showing the trees on the opposite side of the Summit here. And this is on the other side of the saddle in the area of the later train order office. And down through a tunnel, one tunnel on this railroad. The grade here over Montgomery Pass was 2.5%. And with the twists and turns, very definitely a mountain railroad. But actually this steepest part on this section of the railroad was coming out of Tonopah Junction up through the canyon to Belleville, 2.66%. And I have to double check at some point here, but the grade be out of Mound House coming down into Dayton, down the hill there was also one of the very steep parts of the railroad, perhaps even a little bit steeper than what we have over Montgomery. To the state line. Caption is not right. It's 1888, 89, about the same time the previous picture was taken. And so somebody along the way grabbed the photo image and put the caption on it, and it gets repeated a number of times. We have, I think if I go through my notes, I can identify just about everybody on that. And I was looking again at some of it, and I think, I think Cagwin is an engineer on this train too. And I think it's through his family that some of these images got preserved through some of the local history collections. Benton Station, one of the, again, almost rubber stamp stations on the CNC. Two laws, originally called Bishop Creek Station. The Benton Station was not at Benton, it was close to the mining camp of Benton. It was originally called Benton Station, and then it gets renamed Benton by the geological name people who changed Benton to Benton Hot Springs. The railroad going down the east side of Owens Valley named their stations after the nearby town on the west side, and in time they get renamed, particularly I think as post offices get established, and you can't have the same post office at two places, so they have to come up with another name. Law's post office was established in the late 1880s. But you have car 10 between 1903 and 1905, and you got the Miller hook couplers, like so many passenger cars, and big observation windows. And the car gets rebuilt in 1905 to have a more traditional observation platform. Kearsarge, originally called Independence for the west side of town. And in between, it had, between the two names, it was named Citrus. And some of the renaming undoubtedly goes on because once it gets absorbed more into the SP system, you can't have two stations with the same name, so you rename it. And Kearsarge comes after Kearsarge Pass and Mine, and that supposedly got that name from as to counteract the Alabama hills that some Southern sympathizers had named. And so Kearsarge, which was the name of the naval ship that sunk the Confederate raider Alabama off the French coast, that's how that name got picked. And Kearsarge ship was named after a Kearsarge mountain up in the New Hampshire area. Mount Whitney, originally Lone Pine, irrigated and station gardens and trees and all that. In fact, there's a record of a shopkeeper's book that they shipped a lawnmower down to the Mount Whitney station for the station agent to use. To Keeler, this is the original size of the Keeler station before it gets lengthened and a second floor put on it. Again, very much the same type of station all the way through. Also at Keeler. And you had the Ingo Development Company, which was another of the operations that Yerington was involved with and ran out of the office here in Carson City. There was many little, sometimes not so little operations that were also managed out of the V&T office here in Carson City with overlapping investors. Could be very much worthwhile to keep study of all these. Another view at Ingo Development, the steam engine was once on the Eureka and Palisades as the Tybo goes off to the Bodie and Benton operation, the logging operation, hauling cut timbers from the mill on the south side of Mono Lake up to Bodie, up to the mining camp. And it got down here in 1900, 1902. Apparently comes in once and then goes back up to Carson City and gets a replacement cylinder. Inside the Ingo Development Processing Plant. Typically you harvest the mineral salts off of the lake and then you have to heat it up in a solution to then get it to precipitate out to purify minerals. And this is Keeler during the teens. And we get a large, somebody's larger building there. So that's kind of our quick view over the railroad. And this is Hamel in the Hamel Valley. And folk credits, California State Railroad Museum, Central Nevada Museum, Denver Public Library even, Eastern California Museum, Nevada Historical Society, Nevada State Museum, Nevada State Railroad Museum, Special Collections UNR, Dennis Burke Collection, Dave Garcia Collection, my own collection, and the memories of the railroad kind of fade away. Thank you very much. Okay, any quick questions? Yes?
How close to why wasn't a station established at Bucklands?
At which location?
Why was not a station established at Bucklands?
That's Churchill.
That's Churchill.
Yeah.
Churchill Station isn't very far from there.
Oh, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, it's just back toward the, it's just slightly to the west of Buckland Station, where there was lots of land and it wasn't swampy.
The railroad did come past Bucklands.
Right where it went over a little further where it came across. There's a Y there. You can walk up the way and still see the Y, and the track still, it was just moved over a little bit from where the road went through there. It's currently the Hawthorne, the branch that goes down to Hawthorne is still there.
Yeah, so it's because there's that kind of almost kind of almost water gap in there between the river and the stuff flowing down toward Walker Lake, and it's right in that between the hills is where the Churchill station was, and that may have very well have been some reports that was relocated building from elsewhere, and but it was.
We are desperately seeking anything on the Churchill station. A picture.
There are some pictures.
Are there? Oh gosh.
Yeah, some from the standard gauge era.
I'll take anything. The question is, when did it go away, and where are the remnants now? You know, you were with us when we
Yeah,
traveled.
and it was up there where we were looking around the tree, up there.
I know. You just wonder how there's so little left. But the sagebrush has been allowed to grow very, very high, very prolific in there.
Need a fire.
Yeah.
Back in the back.
You'd mentioned that there was a steep grade coming out of Mount House down to Dayton. They typically have to double head to get back up the hill.
In the later part of the boom period in 2000, in 1904, 1905, they were double heading. Prior to that, in 1903, January 1903 through after the standard gauging is what remains of train registers. What it appears in the 1903 era is that they would stop at Dayton, take the passenger cars, or maybe part of the freight cars up the hill, and then the engine would return light and double the hill with the remaining freight cars. And then later on, as I say, they had a helper engine between Dayton and Mount House.
I can't resist throwing in a little hydrology. The water gap between Churchill and Wabusca is called Hadrian Gap. Prehistorically, tens to hundreds of thousands of years ago, the Walker River re-diverted itself, probably during a flood, in a very flat area at the north end of Mesa Valley, and the flow went down Hadrian Gap and into the Carson Sink, and Walker Lake dried up, and that's one of the reasons why there are salt deposits at depth believed beneath the deepest parts of Walker Lake. And it has nothing to do with trains.
Thank you.
Nothing to do with upstream irrigators. Just an upstream river diversion by the river itself. Okay, I was asked by our auction diva to talk about the SP, the SP Narrow Gauge Society contributed the 2 DVDs that are up for auction. These are actually some that were given to us for our help with the producer of the disc, and so we have brought in the 2 to contribute to the auction. It's a